Hi, I'm Jodie O'Brien, part of the AWI Extension South Australia team. We're at Melrose for an eID workshop for productivity and profitability. It's our case study on Omarama Station on the South Island of New Zealand about how they're using eID for classing livestock, presented by Mark Ferguson from neXtgen Agri.
Thanks, Jodie, and thanks to all the team to set up a day like today. All the reps, everyone that's come out. It's awesome to see such a show up of people to help you sort of navigate this world, and also awesome to see such a good roll up as well. So, yeah, we're in for a good day. You're going to hear a bit from me, so I apologise for that. But we're going to start off talking about one of our clients in New Zealand and some work we've done there, and it follows nicely on from what we've just heard from Gus and Chris, who have sort of, I'm just going to take a long-winded way of saying what they've already said, really, and show a few graphs and stuff. But yeah, in this journey, and you're going to hear a lot from myself and Michelle around a lot of the concepts that the guys have just covered, and sort of being careful about making sure we're measuring the stuff that matters to you and not just measuring everything that you can. So I'm going to talk now about some clients in Omarama in the sort of central South Island of New Zealand. Richard and Annabelle Subtle, they farm about sort of 8,000 merino ewes. That sort of hill country in the back is where they would be running their ewes and lambing their ewes. They've got 6 centre pivots where they finish 10,000 merinos. They buy some and finish all their own on pivots. Merino wethers, so they winter them on those pivots and then sell them off about 12 months of age. So the production system is similar, like going through everything that leaves the place is pretty much finished. They finish their own cattle, all on grass. There's not a lot of grain feeding in New Zealand, but are very much driven by merino wool production. They were icebreaker sort of original suppliers, still supply icebreaker, got 10-year contract supplying icebreaker wool. So yeah, a nice farm in the middle of a really nice spot of New Zealand. But I guess, and the guys have already covered this, and Chris covered it well, that the risk is when we start using data that we'll, or whatever we're using, that we will start getting unintended consequences. So this is an unintended consequence of just using classes. So this is the professional classes in the Merino Lifetime Productivity Trials that Bromwell and Clark and Andrew Thompson published this work, but essentially showing that if you just go through the race and you don't know who's a single and a twin, you will accidentally select all the singles because they are better nourished wool, it's slightly finer, they cut a bit more, you've got better colour. There's a range of things that make that wool look nice. And so in our keeper mob, doesn't matter who does it, that could be me, could be you, could be someone we're paying to do it. We end up selecting, so in our keeper mob we've got 70% singles and 30% twins. In our culls we've got 70% twins and 30% keepers. So that's the kind of thing we want to avoid, and that's the kind of thing that eID will help us avoid, getting a bit of information pulled together. And so that's, I guess, something we can work on with eID. And I guess everything you're going to hear from me today, you've heard about the sort of the logistical or the other reasons to have eID in sheep. For me, it's going to be kind of, I guess, the things that we can do with that data and why we're going to be excited about individual data on animals. So at Omarama Station, when I say we, I didn't actually do any of this work. So it was Will Gibson and Jane Mulholland were actually the people on the ground doing it, some team members in New Zealand. They went through, so rather than do the initial or the normal class, which would be go up the race, rattle on the head if you don't like it, and then you draft them off and job's done. We went through and similar to where Gus started, Omarama Station just whacked a heap of tags in. They didn't actually have a clue what they were going to do with the information. When we got there, they had an XR5000 full of data that they'd never really taken off the box, and we find a lot of people like that, so don't be ashamed of that. That's just where people start. But it enabled us to do stuff because they had recorded things over years. So we knew of those hoggets, the ewe hoggets, so they were 12 months of age or just before shearing, and so probably 11 months of age. We knew who was a single and who was a twin because we knew which mob they would lambed in. We knew how old mum was, whether they were out of a maiden or whether they were out of a mixed age ewe, based on the mob that they had been tagged in. We had a weight on them. We had a condition score on the day. We scored foot structure. And these were all simple scores, and on the wand as they went, I didn't do it again. And we've scored wool colour and we scored fleece rot. So we tried to, rather than just have the information, which was a weight in this case and condition score, we went through and scored all the factors. And so I'll just give you a sort of an example of how, or show you how that rolled in terms of what they ended up selecting. So overall, that classing was only a fairly light culling, so 5% cull, 6% in the terminal mob, so both those are basically culls, and then sort of 90% in either the tops or flocks. The tops were just nominated as tops. They don't get treated any differently. It's just nice to say they're a nice sheep, I suppose. But that was the overall result. Often we would be going harder on those animals, but it just depends on the client. But when we go back and have a look into that, so for our fleece rot scores, the whole mob had, so 1 is white, well, no fleece rot, 5 is terrible. So in the whole mob we were pretty good, but 90% or 89% were score 1, so no fleece rot. But by the time after that selection, so what happened, we had all that data, we went through, and so we then ranked it the same as what Chris just covered, but we ranked it using all of those traits, not just the measured stuff. So we had all that data of structure, colour, wool type, and the weights, and then we corrected for single twin, and then we ranked them based on that. So we ended up with a ranking, but it had lots of more information than just the measured stuff. And so in the end of the day, we had a whole mob that had 89% score 1, but in our keepers we ended up 97% score 1. So most of the sheep that we kept had no fleece rot or very little fleece rot, and we got rid of all those sheep that had bad fleece rot. Wool colour, same thing. So the whole mob was 91% 1, which is score white, which is as white as that board up there. Score 5 is about as yellow as the heading there. And obviously we're heading towards that to protect against body strike. We're looking for high or white wool. Again, the whole mob was mostly white, but we had a few of these colours in it. By the time we ended up with our keeper mob, we got them into the 1s and 2s, and so we kept a few 2s, but all the colours were all those worse wool types or wool colours. Same deal with structure. We scored front feet, back feet, overall structure, and then mouth. And so essentially same deal. We got all the bad animals ended up in the culls, and all the good animals ended up in the better animals ended up in the keepers. So again, we're looking at all those factors together rather than individually, and that was all on a spreadsheet rather than trying to do it all in your head on the same day. Body condition score was another thing that we measured or we assessed, and so we score down to quarters. It's not that hard. You can score at halves and have the same effect. We often will score to quarters and record that. I think this is probably, if you're going to get into eID, and well, you have to get into eID, but if you're going to use it to measure stuff, then one of the easiest ones to do is condition score, and all the gear that you'll see today will help you record that. And I think it's a really critical trait in young sheep at this age, at 12 months of age. Their variation in condition score is, and we'll get into that stuff later, but it's a pretty cool trait, or an easy trait to measure, and has an impact on your farm. But again, our whole mob was sort of sitting around just under condition score 3 average. In our culls, we ended up with the lighter end were in our culls. And we ended up with some light ones in our keepers. They would have been the light ones, but it would have been either good weight or good wool colour, other things going on, when it's always a landed compromise breeding. But we managed to get, the lighter end ended up in our culls, and the heavier end ended up in our keepers. And the same deal for body weight. These weights look a bit light, but they weren't quite at the same age. They were a bit earlier, but it's not a great climate. There's a 100-day winter in New Zealand, so they don't do a lot of growing until that spring, which was just before these animals were shorn, and then they do most of their growing. But again, we ended up with, the whole mob was sort of sitting in here somewhere average, but we managed to get more of the heavy ones into the keepers and the light ones into the culls, which was always going to be the plan. Happily, so again, we knew how old mum was. So the maidens, 4 tooths or mixed age, how old mum was, and then in addition to culling singles, culling twins, sorry, we also cull maidens a lot when we because of the same reasons we cull twins, because they're a bit smaller, their wool's not quite as good. So we wanted to protect against that by correcting for dam age. So happily, we sort of ended up with a keeper mob that wasn't that different. And actually ended up culling more of the mixed age out of the mixed age, but that was probably unintended and probably doesn't really matter. But the important thing here is that we didn't cull a heap of those sheep out of the maidens, because that's what we ended up keeping more of them than what their proportion was in the original flock, which is a good sign. And the other good sign in this data is that our we actually ended up preferably keeping twins. So we didn't have that cull off of those twins because we corrected for it and we knew about it. There's some sheep in there we didn't know because gates come open and the usual stuff that happens on farms. But basically the same proportion of twins that was in the mob still there at the end of our culling, so we didn't end up burning a heap of those twins, which is the sort of showing that kind of use of data means you protect yourself against that unintended culls. We didn't, in this case, have fleece weight and fine diameter. If you're, that's something that we'll start to get back into. At that culling, well, when they were culled, they hadn't been shorn yet, but we could do all the stuff that Chris just covered, and in addition to add that trait in, those two traits in there as well, if that was in your breeding objective. So, yeah, heaps of data in front of you there, but just showing that if we, and that wasn't, like that was the same amount of time probably that it would be to normally class sheep, because it was all done on the wand. There was an additional weight, and a condition score, but that was all being done in a pretty methodical. There was, I don't know how many thousand sheep in that mob, but lots of sheep. So yeah, a bit of combined work, but ended up with, I think, a pretty good outcome. And the beauty about it is you can just set, like often when you're classing, you're saying, right, we've got to knock out 30%, and you get through the first 500 and you've knocked out 35%, so you go a bit easier, and then you get a bit tired, and then you get a bit hungry, and so it's not that consistent. Whereas if you're scoring everything and then using that data you can just put that slide rule up and down your index, and cut off exactly the number you want. Obviously, if it's a dead cull, if it's something you hate about it, and if it's got a black spot or something, then that's what the one that gets the rattle on the day. But if it's, but mostly, I guess the opportunity in eID is to use that data, and we'll cover that lots more as we go through the day. But I'll leave it there, Jodie.
Mark, thanks for presenting Omarama's story today about how they're using eID for productivity and profitability outcomes. The case studies are supported by Australian Wool Innovations Extension South Australia, the South Australian Sheep Industry Fund, the Department of Primary Industries and Regions, and Livestock SA.